Hi, in this video, as I said at the end of the last session, we're going to take a break from the music theory and look at some practical ideas that you can use to get the most from your practice time. So before we move into the actual chord progressions, there's a couple of general points I'd like to make. First off, you may be well familiar with the expression no pain, no gain. Well, let me tell you, this categorically does not apply. If you carry on playing your guitar beyond the point that it becomes painful, then you're risking all manner of repetitive strain injuries such as tendonitis, carpal tunnel syndrome, tennis elbow, any one of which can put you out of action for months. So the golden rule is, as soon as it starts to hurt, it's time to take a break. The other important rule that I'd like to establish is that we don't practice for speed. We all want to become whizzy, flashy guitarists in the end, but speed will develop as a natural consequence of increasing fluency and dexterity as you work your way through the exercises and indeed through your performance pieces. So when we practice, the emphasis should always be on accuracy, quality of tone and timing. So if you have access to a metronome or a drum machine, then it's a good idea to devote at least a little bit of your practicing time to playing along with those to ensure that you're keeping good time. If you don't have a metronome or a drum machine, then perhaps you should get one. If you have a smartphone or a tablet, then there are apps you can download that'll do that job for you. Okay, when it comes to practicing the actual chords, the first thing we need to do, of course, is learn the correct fingering for each chord. Now, whether you choose to do this from my own book or from any other chord dictionary or tutorial, or indeed in lessons with a guitar teacher, really makes no difference. One thing I would say, if there's an open position chord you can use, then you should use it. By open position I mean the four fingers of your left hand are covering the first four fret spaces of the guitar, and at least one open string of the guitar is in play in the chord. Why do I say this? Well, as you work your way through the chord progressions and through the different keys, you'll very soon start to encounter chords that can't be played in the open position. And remember, any chord that doesn't use open strings can be easily transposed to any key. So anytime you learn a new chord shape which has no open strings in it, you've effectively learnt a new chord shape for all 12 keys. Since you're going to encounter these chord shapes sooner or later anyway, there's no point in using them if you have an open position chord that you can use. So using the open position chord will add one more chord shape to your repertoire. In terms of the major triads, the open position chords we have available are the C, G, D, A and E. In the minor triads we have D minor, A minor and E minor. So we're going to use as an example the first chord sequence we met, which is the 1-4-5 in C major, but these principles that we're going to outline will apply to any chord progression in any key. So the first thing we've got to do is learn the individual chords one at a time. So we're going to start with this open position C here, and we want to play each individual note to ensure that every note is sounding clearly. There's no dead strings, no unwanted rattles or buzzes from the frets, and then we strum the whole chord. Once we've got our first chord sorted out, we move to the next one, which in this progression is the F major. Now this is the most usual position for playing the F major. And we notice a slight problem here in that this is a bar chord. By bar chord we mean that the first finger is covering all 6 strings and has to hold them down in order to form the full chord. We don't have an open position chord available to play this F. Now bar chords are notoriously a problem for people just beginning to play the guitar. They're not easy to play, they're hard work, and they take quite a bit of practice. if you're really struggling with the bar chord, you can play the F chord on just the middle 4 strings, like that, making sure that the outer strings are not sounding in the chord. However, my advice would be to persevere and try to master the bar chords as early as you possibly can, because they are such a useful tool to have in your repertoire. So once again we play the individual notes to make sure we're hearing them all cleanly and clearly, and then we move on to the final chord of this progression, the 5 chord, in this case the G major, and perform the same exercise. Okay, once we've established the chord shapes we're using, we need to practice the changes between them. And we simply take a pace that's comfortable and cycle round the chords. Thus. And usually returning to the one chord at the very end, as this helps to train your ear and remind you where the key is centred. Now, in terms of actually making the changes, our objective should be to keep movement and therefore effort to a minimum. So if I look at this change from the C chord to the F chord, the first thing I notice is that this note C is present in both chords. It forms the root of the C chord and it forms the 5th of the F chord. So the first thing we can say is that we can make this chord change without that 3rd finger on the C moving at all. Okay, the next smallest movement we can make is this little finger, which you can see is not in use in the C chord, but in the F chord it's playing here on this string at the 3rd fret. So while we're playing the C chord, this little finger, rather than waving around in the air, should be poised just over the position it's going to play in the F chord, and then when it comes to the F, we just put it down. The next smallest movement is this 2nd finger here, which is playing this position in the C and simply moves up 1 string when you form the F chord. So finally, this 1st finger is already playing 1 note in the 1st fret position in the C, simply extended downwards to cover all 6 strings to make the bar of the F chord. If you're struggling to make this chord change as a single movement, then you can break it down into these individual movements. So from the C, we start with C stays where it is, 4th finger goes down there, 2nd finger moves up a string, 1st finger moves to cover all 6 strings. And then we can speed that up. Until the separate movements become consolidated into a single change from the C to the F. Similarly, in moving from the G, if I use this G shape here, using my 3rd finger on the root G, to form the C chord, these 2 fingers simply move up 1 string in the same pattern. And then the 1st finger goes down while the 4th finger lifts off. So again, 2 fingers up, 1st finger down, 4th finger off. So we can now move between all 3 chords and back to the 1 chord. As you become more comfortable with the chord changes, you can start varying the sequence. So instead of playing 1, 4, 5, you could play 1, 5, and so on until you become comfortable with not just the 3-chord sequence, but between the movements between any pair of chords taken from the progression. Once you're comfortable with moving between the chords, it's time to start thinking about building in a little bit of right hand technique. So the first thing we can do is add some rhythm. And as your right hand technique develops, you can move on to rhythms of increasing complexity, maybe a little bit of reggae. Or give it the bow diddly. And you know, the sky's pretty much the limit. You can devise and practice rhythms of almost unlimited complexity. Okay, once we've got strumming sorted out, or even before you've got the strumming sorted out, you can start looking at picking patterns. If you're a finger picker, you can start using your picking patterns on each chord of the progression. If you're a plectrum player like myself, you can try to achieve the same effect with the picks. You can mix strumming and picking. And so on with, as I say, ever-increasing complexity to suit your own pace of development. Okay, another little thing you can do is to create some melodic patterns to link the chords of the sequence. One of the simplest ways to start might be to fill in the gaps between the chords with the intervening scale notes. So as we go from the C to the F, we can play C, and then play individual notes, C, D, E, chord of F, from the chord of G, E, A, B, C. So on. If you want to be a little bit more adventurous, we can try introducing notes that don't form part of the scale, what we call chromatic movement. So for example, between this F chord and the G chord, between the roots of F and G, there is no note that falls within the C major scale, but there is this F sharp here, so we can play that between the F and the G, giving us a pattern something like. And so on. And I'm sure you can devise many more variations to enhance your practice and make use of the more familiar chords to help develop the work of your right hand. Okay, I think that's all we're going to deal with for this session. There will be other sessions on practice tips and techniques scattered through this series, but for our next video we're going to move back to the chord progressions and complete our set of major key chord progressions in triads by adding one more chord to the 2-5-1 progression to give us the progression 6-2-5-1.